while we get started, who has built Office apps before? One person, two people. Visto counts. Yeah. Not after our talk, but Visto counts. Anyone else? You folks? When people like it? Love it? Hate it? All right.
Who's SharePoint developers here? Anyone?
A few SharePoint developers. Pretty good.
A few more of those.
All right. Of the folks that have built apps, is it just like demo things, or are you actually building apps for customers? Building apps for customers? All right. If you built an app and you are here to either critique the talk or throw stones at us, we probably want to find another talk. This is going to be more of an intro talk. We want to get everybody up to speed on what apps are. We'll look at the development environment, what it takes to build apps. There's a few other talks. There's actually one other talk. Nathan Miller and Richard are going to be doing a talk on Thursday, I think it is, Thursday, which will go deeper into building apps. So you'll be able to hear a little bit about the other Office apps and things like that, but if you're here for new information, if you've built apps before, to be clear, if you've built apps before, you're probably not going to find new information. You're probably just going to find some reinforcement on the stuff that you've already learned. So I'll give you a chance to exit the room. I will not scream at you or throw stones at you on your way out. But I do want to make sure that I set you up for success, right? I want to make sure that you get your money's worth. Yes, sir? 2013 apps. Yep, the Office apps. Yes, sir? All right. This one's all about Office apps. We got the SharePoint apps later on today.
We'll do one example of combining those. So there's some pretty cool things when we combine a SharePoint app with an Office app, and we'll walk through one of those. So we have a session on Thursday. It's titled Advanced Cloud-Hosted Scenarios, but we'll show kind of a really complete solution that has a lot of Office apps. It has a mail app, has some cool Excel apps, and talk about some interesting tenancy considerations and building apps at scale. So. Is that doable for you?
I think so.
Wow, cool.
Extended mode. Okay, that's what. Makes sense. So we're running projector on this. So all right, thanks.
Anyone y'all go to the foundational session yesterday? Anyone with Brian Jones? Cool. Awesome. Who's got their Surface yet? Ooh, cool. What was the longest wait anyone had to wait here? 2.5 hours. Anyone beat 2.5 hours? On Sunday. You're the winner. You want to see if they have a keyboard you can hook to it? You want to put it on my screen while you're doing this? Oh, sorry.
All right, we have that, we have that. We have this. Just give me a sec to set up and show you what we were going to show you. This will be probably one of the most awkward demos when it comes to my portion. Having a problem with video on my machine. Anyone have the Lenovo 530? Lenovo 530, one person. Have you tried to project? No? All right, for some reason it is odd. If you're ever going to come on stage, yeah, be prepared to not have fun. All right, where's our clicker? All right, here we go. Thank you, guys. We are ready to go. Welcome to Tuesday of TechEd. We had kind of the introductory questions, but I do want to make sure that for the folks who just arrived in the room, make sure we set proper expectations. This is a 0 to 60 developing apps, and the idea behind this talk is really to get you up to speed as quickly as possible on how to build apps for Office. We'll walk through the development environment, what it takes to actually build them. We'll give you some quick tips on what it takes to build all the different types of apps, and we'll talk about the different types of apps and what's new in 2013. We'll also give you an introduction and show you some apps, some of what's possible, right? What can I do with these apps? My name is Israel Vega, and I'm with a company called Inkblock Consulting. With me today, I have the pleasure of being joined with Richard DeZerga of Microsoft, and both of us will walk you through this, not at 0 to 60 speed. It would be 0 to 75-minute speed. We do have some time in the end built in so that we can answer questions if you have questions. Again, the objectives for us is to talk to you about the possible and get you excited about building apps. By the end of this talk as well, we want you to go out and actually provision developer tenants and show you how easy it is to actually build apps. Some other things we want you to say after this talk. Do a little fill in the blank, right? It's morning time. I didn't think apps could do that. I've never seen so many, right? These are all things I want you to say after the talk. That didn't hit as well. We'll see if this one works. There's nothing like the smell of apps in the morning. After you build them, you might say to your friends, hey, can I show you my apps? All right, and then my favorite. I can't wait to go home and, all right. Let's show you what's possible.
All right, guys, so what we wanted to do to start off was kind of give you a full overview of kind of an end-to-end scenario that touches all the different types of apps. So what I'm going to do is, within about 3 minutes, show you all 3 different types of apps for Office. So again, when you saw the title of this is concentrating on apps for Office. We are going to touch a little bit on apps for SharePoint because there's some really neat synergies between the two of those. But let me walk you through a really quick demonstration of the app model as it pertains to Office. And most of this is things that you can go grab out of the Office store. So we'll talk about the Office store later, but basically it's a place where you can go get apps for Office. So what I'm going to do, let's say I started my morning and I'm going to go jump into Outlook. This is kind of where I start my day, and I have an email here from my boss. He happens to be here in New Orleans with me, and he wants to sync up for lunch. And so I see an email here, and one of the things that's happened here is that we're displaying several options of what we call a mail app. A mail app is something that's very contextual, and it's something that, in this case, it's looked at known types within Exchange. So Exchange, when it gets an email, it knows, hey, there might be a suggested meeting here or an address or something like that, and we're able to use that to activate these apps. So if I were to click on Bing Maps, what you'll see is, and down here at the bottom, it's highlighting an address, and it's showing me where that is on a map. And this is fully interactive. I can zoom in, zoom out. And then I can go to suggested meeting, and you can see that it highlights that area that was the suggested meeting that Exchange was able to find. So in this case, my boss wants to meet up. I see the location he's at, and I can see the day that he wants to meet up. Looks like it's a couple days from now. One of the cool things about this is I'm in Outlook right now, but all of this works just as easily in the browser. So if I were to come over here, here's OA, and again, the exact same apps work. And we'll talk about the breakdown of how that's possible, but what we'll see is the apps are built to extend across clients. So we're going to be able to work both in the rich client and in the browser. So what I need to do is maybe go find a location. My boss is a foodie, and if you read the mail here, he's basically saying, let's go get some good New Orleans flair. So let me go find a good place to eat. I happen to have built a quick little app here for Excel that allows me to go pull in, basically do restaurant searches. Anyone had any good food here in New Orleans? What's good here? What'd you say? What's a good food?
Gordon Biersch says they have burgers, they
Po'
have gumbo.
boys.
Po' boys. Garlic fries.
Let's see if that's right. So let's do a search for po' boys. We're going to go do a search out here, and hopefully, all right, we get some results back. So in this case, I'm actually going out and I'm calling into a basically Yelp API in this case to go get some information back. Just to key on something, and we're going to talk about this here a little bit later, is that all the content of an app is basically just a web application. You pick your favorite web technology. I don't care if it's MVC, if it's just pure HTML5 and JavaScript, or maybe it's PHP. I don't care. This is just HTML content. So if I go here and view source, it's just HTML content that's in this app. What I want to do, though, is this seems very standalone. If I want to interact with the document, what I can do is say, let me import that raw data. In this case, I'm going to go ahead and close my app. I'm done with it. We have some raw data that I could do all kinds of things, and I might want to report against it. But in this case, I'm going to use another type of app. So far we've seen mail apps. We've seen task pane apps. The third type is what we call a content app. So I'm going to go and insert a content app into my page here. And I'm going to do a Bing Maps one here. And I'm just going to select a latitude and longitude column, and I'm going to pin this on my map. And just like that, it went and pulled all those locations. Again, this is just web content, so if I put this in something like Excel services within SharePoint, guess what? That works. In fact, I can pull that up just as that one visual and put it as like a web part on a page. So hopefully this illustrates kind of the different types of apps. We're going to talk about how we build those, how we do reading and writing between the document and our app, and let's get into it.
All right.
So, first of all, why apps? I thought this was a really fitting picture, kind of coming from where we have in doing development with Office, right? Office add-ins have traditionally been something that was pretty invasive to Office, right? You had to go and install all these binaries on someone's machine, and that's what allowed you to run that Office add-in. That crippled a lot of customers. I can't tell you how many customers I've worked with that have ended up being stuck in a version of Office because they had some special add-in to Excel that they ran their business on. Well, we really wanted to get away from that. Another thing is we had inconsistent experience. I might have some add-ins that only worked inside of Excel client and not in Excel services. And if I wanted to have that experience across both those clients, maybe even a mobile browser, now that mobile's getting more prevalent, that was a challenge in the past. And then finally, it kind of was a specialized skill set. Who here has done like a VSTO project before?
There were some folks over there that did VSTO, yep.
Yeah, it's probably a minority of those that are in this room. It was something that you had to learn a very specific skill set. Now, what's neat is some of that stuff carries forward. So if you've worked with like OpenXML, some of that you can actually use to your advantage in the new model. But these are things that we tried to address in our app model. We really wanted to cater to the web developers, right? I bet I could count, in a pretty easy way the amount of people that do VSTO add-ins, but the amount of web developers in the world is incredible. So if I could cater to that group to be able to do Office add-ins, we're really taking it kind of to a new level. So if we kind of look at the anatomy of an app, remember that picture that showed all these nails sticking into a telephone pole? If that was the old way, the new way is completely opposite. When I go and I install an app into, let's say, Excel, all I'm really doing is giving Excel a little XML file. That's all that Excel knows about. There's no binaries. It's just an XML file. It's a manifest that basically says, here's the web page where my app lives. That web page could be anywhere in the world, right? So I could be, my Excel client obviously is on my machine here, but I could have a web server that's in Singapore somewhere that's serving up that app. So that's a really key thing, is that I just web content really from anywhere. Then we're going to be able to interact with that web content and our Office document or mail item through something that we call the Web Extensibility Framework. And this is a client-side, a JavaScript API that's going to allow us to do a lot of really neat things. Be able to write into our document, read out of our document, look at known types within Exchange. It's going to allow us to do a lot of very powerful things. So if I put together this manifest, this web page, and this Web Extensibility Framework, I now have a model where I can have both things talk to each other and do some really exciting things in these apps.
All right, so let's look at the types of apps. You saw this in the examples that Richard showed, but we just want to give you a quick overview of what these different types of apps are. two big buckets. One of them is document-centric, which is document-centric, which is specifically Excel, Word, PowerPoint type apps, and mail apps, which we break out into a separate category, obviously because it's mail, it's not a document. When we look at the document-centric apps, here we're talking about two additional buckets. One is a task pane app, which is something that sits kind of next to your document. If we look at this, here is a Word document, and we're highlighting a word, and we're doing a lookup. Right? This is very similar to what you do in 2007 or 2010 with the task pane, where you pop open a task pane and do some work there. In the past, this was a Visto app. Now this is an Office app, which is, again, just HTML, JavaScript, calling out to an external service and sitting kind of as a companion next to your app. The other type of app that we have is a content app. Content app, you saw this, Richard showed you. I can just take a content app, put it on top of my data, and now I can interact with my data. The cool thing about the content apps is if you had let's go back to if you had a Visto add-in, and I was working with a document, if I send that document over to Richard, he wouldn't have that Visto add-in. He may not have it. And if he doesn't have it, his app doesn't work the same way mine works. Well, in this case here, we're going to take a snapshot of what that app actually looks like. So when I go ahead and send it to Richard, Richard can open up that app. He's going to see the snapshot. He's going to see that there's an app that's associated with this particular document, and it's going to give him an opportunity to download that app on his machine. And now he can get the same experience that I have with a document that I had sent them. Right? So that's a content app, kind of lives with the document.
That's a really good point is when you look at those two document-centric apps, the task pane app, it's not a part of the document. It's something that supports building the document. It supports the document in some way, but it's not a part of the document. When you save it off, it's not there. Whereas a content app, it's a part of the document. When you save it, it's there with it. I can pass it along, and it's actually a part of that document.
That's a good point. We got a question over here?
Sure. Yeah, we can show that to you. Sure. Yeah.
Yep. And the last type of app we have here is a mail app. And again, we saw this where we're highlighting things in your email. Some questions that we normally get around mail apps is, first question is, can my app read someone else's inbox, right? Is it reading my email? We'll talk about the anatomy of this when we get to the mail app section, but the answer to that is no, and we'll show you how it's doing that, right? Because then you ask yourself, right, as a developer, well, how is that thing popping up? How does it know that my app needs to run? How does it do that? And again, we'll talk about that. But with a mail app, here you can have a bunch of different apps that are interacting with different mail items, allowing the user to actually interact with that when they click on it, and do some things where we're accessing some known types, such as addresses, contacts, things like that. So those are the three different kinds here. From an experience standpoint, when we look at the landscape of what these Office apps can do, here we'll start with the side there where it says Task Pane Apps. Within the Office application, those icons are the ones where you can use Task Pane Apps. We can use them in PowerPoint, Project, Word, and Excel. For content apps right now are specific to Excel. For mail apps, of course, those are going to be Outlook only. These are all 2013 type features. If you don't have 2013 and you have 2010, or you happen to have a Mac, this is where we start looking at the Office web applications. If I were to build an Office web application for a Task Pane app, that Task Pane app will show up in the Office web application. If I build a content app, it will also show up in the Office web application, only for Excel. For mail apps, we saw this in the demo where Richard showed you the mail app. With the Outlook Office web applications, that will show up. Right? So that's just a quick grid to show you kind of the supportability matrix around what different types of apps are actually supported in what scenario. Some UX guidelines, some things we wanted to leave you with as you're thinking about building these apps. Right? There's some do's and don'ts.
Yeah, so I think I'm kind of a UX guy, and when I first thought about kind of this model of where really things are like iframes, kind of like an iframe that I have in different places, is I was immediately concerned that everything's going to look completely branded differently, and it's not going to look like it's really a part of Office, and that's really what I was concerned about. And so I was pleased to see that we thought about that a lot, and we put a lot of guidance around how you should do UX of these apps. So for instance, a task pane app, remember a task pane app's over to the side. It's appropriate for that to maybe have a vertical scroll bar, but we don't want you to do a horizontal scroll bar. A content app, which is basically an island in the middle of, like, think of it as like a chart maybe that you put on your screen, it's never appropriate for those to have any scroll bars whatsoever, right? You always want to hide any sort of overflow in your HTML. We do give you things like being able to leverage styles, even though it is a browser control in the client and an iframe when we put it into SharePoint. You still don't have full access to everything that JavaScript might do, so I can't do things like alerts from it. So you need to think about that. If I need to send messages to the user, I need to maybe have like a div that is specifically for messages, and I think you'll see that in some of the apps that we do. Other things, if you can navigate around different pages in these apps, that's very common. Just make sure that you don't get a user lost. I think it's kind of similar to, typical web development. The only difference is here, the user doesn't have an address bar to fix where it's at. So if they get in some area where there's no way to navigate back, they're going to get stuck. So you need to really think about that when you develop some of your different apps.
All right, so apps. How do we build these? Let's flip over to the screen here. That's you. This is me. That is my wife. All right, so what does it take to build these? First thing we'll do is we'll go to dev.office.com. On dev.office.com, everyone in the room, as a matter of fact, we should give these away. I think we should give away developer tenants today. I'm going to be like Oprah. I'm feeling like Oprah today. You get a tenant. You get a tenant. You get a tenant. Everybody gets a developer tenant. Go out to dev.office.com and go ahead and spin up a developer tenant. When you get that developer tenant, you will get a copy of Exchange. You'll get a copy of Link in the cloud. You'll get a copy of SharePoint, and you'll be able to build these apps. And so if you go out there, there's a big button, and there's a 3-step process. You go out there, provision yourself a developer tenant, get one, and then start building apps. What do you get, and how do I actually start building these? Here's a developer tenant. You'll get a big button on your developer tenant that says Build Apps. We'll click on that. When we click on that, if you do not have it, this is a tool. It's an HTML tool. And what's interesting is it's an app. The app is called Napa. The app is an app that allows you to build apps that is deployed as an app.
You just confused me.
I know.
So this is a SharePoint app for building apps, right?
That is correct.
Okay.
Deployed like an app, built like an app, used to build apps.
For apps.
For apps. All right, so if we look at this, we've got the Napa app. The Napa app allows me to do some things. Now, it's not for the Visual Studio folks in the room. We're going to make you happy in a little bit, but we'll walk you through this. I just want to give you a quick overview of what the Napa app is. It allows us to build different apps. So here in this case, we'll build a task pane app. We'll build task pane app number 4.
So again, back to why apps. One of the things is not that it was a big inhibitor, but the cost of entry to develop apps. At the very least, you needed Visual Studio in the past. Now, really, we give you an in-browser IDE for these things. You could even use, just Notepad.
Absolutely. You could use Notepad if you want to use it. If you happen to have a Mac or an alternative operating system, you could actually do this on the Mac. If you are going to try this to test the Microsoft folks in the room, don't use Safari. Use Firefox or Chrome on the Mac if you're going to be doing this. But this actually works, and the cool thing about this is it actually gives you, full IntelliSense. So here, we have result.value, right? We have the office types that'll give you, right? They'll pop up, cool little IntelliSense. They've done a really good job on this, and it gives you kind of a very quick IDE. Now, in this case here, what we're doing is we're going to get and set data. We're going to get data. And I'll walk you through another example in Visual Studio, but I just want to show you how simple it is. The Hello World app that comes with the Napa tenant is very quick, and it's ready to rock out of the box. That rhymes. I'm going to click the little play button. When I click the little play button, what it's going to do is going to upload that to my developer tenant. And as it's uploading to my developer tenant, Richard, what is it doing?
So the interesting thing here is remember is that your content is being delivered via web content. So you've got to think, well, I have to have a web server involved. Is my development tenant a web server? Well, it's SharePoint. SharePoint delivers web content, so that's what's happening here. It's actually provisioning a little sandbox area within SharePoint that it can host your HTML pages. In fact, if we were to be able to sneak around here, we could see that start page is a SharePoint address.
It blocked my little pop-up. So you're saying I can host this on anything. Right now what I'm doing is I'm hosting it on my developer tenant. That is my web server. And it is installing and it's firing up my app. It's going to prompt me for credentials.
But you don't, again, I think the key here is that you pick the web technology of your choice. For Napa, we're going to default to using SharePoint as that web host, but I'll tell you that the majority of the apps that I've built, I use Windows Azure. So I deploy things out to Azure. Now with Azure websites, you can just go to town on that stuff. You could just easily deploy it on something on-premise if you wanted to. The key is that the app knows about the entry point to the web application. So it needs to know a URL. Where do I need to display in that little browser controller iframe?
All right, and a demo would not be a demo if it didn't work. So the other thing that Napa provides you is this cool experience to do something else with my app other than me build my app. There's a concept called sharing the project. Let's say I build an app and I want to share it with my friend. Hey, can you look at this app, make sure I'm building the right thing, make sure I'm abiding to the UI guidelines. I can click the button share. I get a short URL. I send it to somebody. They click on it. Automatically, it installs to their machine. So or installs to their tenant. So it's a very quick way to share apps right from the Napa tenant. The other thing I can do is I can open in Visual Studio. When I click open in Visual Studio, what it's going to do is package that app. Here. Package that app, allow me to run it. If I were to run this, what it would do is it would actually fire up Visual Studio. I already have Visual Studio open with another app, but I just want to give you a quick overview, quick example of what this is actually, what you can do with Napa. All right, so we'll get some of these things out of the way. Let's walk through the anatomy of an app. Richard talked about this. First thing we want to take you to is the manifest. Here we go. The manifest file is what tells both Visual Studio and the place that it's deploying what type of app it is. So you see on the bottom there's some checkboxes for capabilities. In this case here, it is a workbook for Excel. But if I wanted to build something that will target both documents, workbooks, project plans, and presentations, I can check the boxes. And for the Visto developers in the room, you're saying to yourself, really, I can build an app in Excel and make it available in Word, Excel, and PowerPoint? Yes, you can. No applause for the yes, you can. I don't think they appreciate it, so let's show them. Office add-ins, lots of add-ins. Apps, one, right? Pretty cool. Let's get to the...
Actually, while you're here... Okay, yeah, that's fine. Yep.
So the other thing that's interesting is this is a behind-the-scenes view. You got a visual view, and you have a behind-the-scenes view. This behind-the-scenes view is pretty interesting, and the thing we want to point out, two things. One, source location. What this is telling the app is where do you want it to start when it runs. This could point to Bing.com if you wanted to have just Bing.com inside of an app. It could point to the URL of some web server that you have hosted somewhere. So an app is just really an iframe here with a start page. So that's the first thing to note. Second thing to note is that there is this concept of permissions. And with different apps, you don't want to give everyone permissions to actually do lots of things. So every app has to ask for those specific type of permissions. In this case here, we're asking for the permission to read and write a document. And then you ask to yourself, well, you showed me how to read a document in Napa. How do I actually write to a document? That's a great question, audience. Thank you for asking that. Let me show you. The one thing that we have within, we'll zoom in on that, office.context.document.set selected data async. And what that method allows us to do is actually put content back into the document. We're able to get content using the get selected async method, and we're able to put content using the setSelectedAsync method. There's other ways to put content, and Richard will demo that in a second, but that's pretty much how easy it is to read and write content from a document. And if you look, it's just jQuery and HTML. So if we go to the actual view of this, we'll go to the home page here, and we'll zoom in. Right, this is all just HTML. All I'm doing is creating an HTML page that allows me to bind some data to the HTML page and host it. Let's see what this looks like when it's running. We've got a breakpoint set. Back to Excel. Here it's uploading that to my tenant, uploading that manifest to my tenant, and starting my Excel.
While he's doing that, another thing I think that's pretty interesting that you said something I didn't even think about talking to them about, and that is if you have existing web applications that you might think, hey, maybe this would fit good into the app model. Maybe we could somehow surface this and interact with our Office document. You could take an existing web application. If you right-click the web application and have the tools installed, the tools will actually say, I want to add an app for Office. And it'll add all the things that you need, a manifest and things like that, so that you can basically convert your existing web applications into an app for Office, even an app for SharePoint.
I think that's the halfway point. Okay. That means, hey, Israel, this is still starting. Your machine's having more problems. Here's what we're going to do. Yes, sir, question. So the question is, if I have an external app, and let's say that app isn't available, can I take some sort of action on that? Within regular JSON, if you're making a call, let's say it's a service call, high latency service call, you can add some timeouts in there, and then on the timeouts, you can just capture the fail or the error, and then do something on the error. So the error that'll come back, it won't be a 200. I think it'll give you a timeout error, what comes back on the service. And then when you get that back, then you can react to it in the UI.
If it can't get any of the HTML, it depends on what type of app it is. If it's a task pane app, it'll say it can't load the app. If it was a content app and you've had it in there before, the cool thing is a content app, when you save the document, it actually takes like a PNG snapshot of that image, and it'll bring the image up of exactly what it looked like the last time you saved the document. So if it can't load that app, it'll at least do the image of it.
Yep, so it looks like I'm having, in addition to video problems, I'm also having connectivity problems. So I'm going to switch over in the interest of time. We're going to flip over to continuing this, and I'll try to get something going for the mail app. All right, so reading and writing from a document. What I did was I showed you the code for this. This is just more of a reminder. As you look in the APIs, really what you're looking at is reading and writing. And you ask yourself, hey, self, I do more things than read and write. When Microsoft looked at this, they looked at all the support cases for all the add-ins, and they said, most of these support cases and most of the things that crash within Office might be related to add-ins, right? A high majority of them. What are those add-ins doing? Most of those add-ins were reading and writing to a document. About 90% of what you're going to be doing is reading and writing to a document. So it makes sense that that's the first APIs that they're going to provide you. And then you ask, well, can I really do a lot with just reading and writing from a document? Actually, you can. And Richard will show you some examples of that. So get and set, being able to add and read documents or document data from your document. Add handler async and selection changed. Those are two interesting things because they also provide an eventing model for as the user's typing, you're able to take some action. And you could actually bind JavaScript events to the document, and as those JavaScript events fire, you could add handlers to that and do something special. For example, if they're typing, you could replace all the letters A with R if you wanted to, right?
And
if you wanted to write something like that.
And actually, to be more specific there, for the one here when we're talking about I/O, that's really around what's selected. We're going to talk about bindings in a second, and that's where I can bind, and if they type and change, we'd see a lot of differences.
Yep.
So,
and some of those data types that come back, we have text, which is just regular string data, matrix and table when we're dealing with multi-dimensional data. We also have HTML data in Word, so if you're looking at creating documents from within an app within Word, doing like document assembly, things like that, you might be looking at HTML. You might also be looking at OpenOffice XML, specifically with Word.
now, there's a really cool example of the OpenOffice one is, I don't know if anyone's familiar with like Avery labels. typically you go buy a box of labels and you have to go find the template somewhere. Well, they have an app that'll actually go and inject the entire open XML structure of that template for you. I think that's an absolute fantastic example of taking kind of control of that document and building it.
Absolutely.
Cool. So that was reading and writing based on selections. Let's talk about bindings. Bindings are a little bit different. So when we were talking about I/O and Israel was kind of going through some of the APIs that were there, that was based upon what's highlighted, what I have highlighted in my cursor, or maybe the cell that I have selected. What if there's something in the document that I want to actually bind to? So if that changes or I reopen the document, I can kind of lock onto a specific part of the document. And that's what bindings allow me to do. It's going to allow me to lock into something so that when I reopen it, it can save that binding for me if I need to, or if things change along the way, I can automatically get that information. And so some of the things that I have here are things for like adding a binding. There's 3 ways that I can add a binding. So I can add a binding based upon a prompt. So if I were to do that, it would actually launch a little prompt and say, select what you want to bind to. I can do a binding based on selection. So if I'm in Excel and I have A1 through C17 selected, that's what I would bind to. Or I can bind based upon a named item. So if I have like a table in Excel, which is the example we'll go through, I can actually bind to that named table. And again, as that table moves around, I'm bound to that named item, and so it carries through. Then I can reference my binding. I can go get that binding, so I can either do get all async. The more common one I tend to see is get by ID. So when you create the binding, you give it an ID of some sort. Well, then I can go back and get reference to that and be able to use it in some sort of way. I can remove bindings, and then I can add different handlers on it. So if I want to know when something changes in my binding, I can do that. Bindings aren't going to work with all of those. We call those coercion types that Israel was going through. So we don't do the open XML or HTML, but we are going to do all the other things like a text, matrix, and table. Anyone know the difference between a matrix and table? So a matrix is going to be a fixed size, so it's going to have a certain number of columns and rows, and whereas a table is something that's more dynamic. So a table is something I might have infinite number of rows, and so we'll take a look at some of that. All right, so let's jump over and take a look at another app that does bindings. So I thought since we did a task pane app, let's build a content app. I think the content apps are really cool because they look phenomenal when I put them in the browser. In fact, I'm not going to demonstrate this one. This is one that's out in the Office store. It's called Bubbles. I think you guys actually saw a copy of it. But this is Bubbles in a browser. What you're seeing over here, and this is completely interactive. I can drag these guys around my screen. This is just HTML5. And what's cool is it's Excel services, but all I did was go put that named item in a web part. So that's SharePoint with just an Excel part that's showing my app. I mean, that's what it is. So to me, that's just really cool. I can do some amazing visuals with things like a content app. And so let's build a content app. Kind of going along with the theme, we found some restaurants to go get po' boys, but maybe I want to pick one in a different way. And so what I thought would be kind of a fun thing is build almost like an urban spoon inside of an Excel app to where we can bind to a table of different restaurants, spin a wheel, and get a selection. And that's what I've done here. So let me show you the app running, and then we'll kind of dissect this a little bit and how we do it. One of the other things I want to point out here is Israel kind of highlighted this, but all of the default, when you go and create an app, it's going to ask you the different types of apps you want, and all of those are going to default with a fantastic Hello World example. So, for instance, the content app for Excel, it gives you a great example of doing bindings and how to do all that. So you don't even have to go off and search on MSDN on how to build these things because the default template already has a lot of that there, and you can kind of just augment that how you need to. In fact, this app, I probably only changed maybe half my script file, and the rest was existing. So let's go ahead and play this guy, and we'll take a look at how this looks. I'm actually going to run 2 apps at once here. Let's go to my geo sample as well. So let's go ahead and pull in those po' boys again. There's our po' boys. We'll go ahead and import that raw data. And now what I want to do is, so first of all, you can see up here that I have, this is table 1. So I'm going to have a couple of ways that I can bind to this. I can bind to it by table 1, or I could just select the entire table. This is a dynamic table, so I could add more items if I wanted to add them to the list here. What I want to do is now go insert that new app that I just created. And again, the way I do that is go to the Insert tab, insert an app for Office, and you can see I have this Excel picker wheel. So we're going to pull up the Excel picker wheel here. And the first thing that this is going to do, it's going to ask me to bind to a table. And you can see I have a few options here. I can bind to a selection. I can bind to a name item. Let's go ahead and maybe do a bind to a named item. So again, my table was table 1. So I'll go ahead and bind to named item. And you can see as soon as I do that, it basically went and read all the data here. And we have a live binding to this. So if I go and spin my wheel, you can see it spins through this. And we'll see what kind of restaurant we're going to go eat for lunch. Okay, looks like we're going to go to Desire Oyster Bar. All right. The cool thing is this is live. So if I go and added Richard's Restaurant, it actually went and updated that wheel. So I don't know if I'll get lucky and get my own restaurant, but we might be able to see that it's in here.
Then we'll know it's fixed.
Yeah, it's in here.
Happens.
I promise you it is. So, but ultimately, you can see that we can do some really interesting things with those bindings and be able to, again, have this live. So one of the things I'll do is let me save this, since we had the question about being able to maintain this. So let me just save it to my desktop, maybe. Sample. I'm going to close out of here, and we're going to take a look at that app in a little bit more detail. So first of all, you can see that I'm doing a couple things here. This is where I go and I establish my bindings. So I'm using the Web Extensibility Framework, which is, again, those JavaScript libraries that we give you to work with Office documents. So you can see I'm doing a office.context.document.bindings. And I'm adding either a couple different ways. So here's an example of adding from selection. And if I scroll down here a little bit, here's adding via named item. And it's going and looking at the value of the text box to find the named item. So that's how we add our bindings. Now, my bindings behind the scenes, I've hard-coded a binding ID. So you can see here that I'm actually saying app.bindingID. Behind the scenes, that's just hard-coded. I think I call it my binding. But what that's going to allow me to do is go and get reference to that binding later when I want to use that binding in some sort of way. So let me zoom out here and we'll take a look at my actual app JavaScript. Some of this stuff at the beginning is just script to build a wheel. So now just, kind of a slot machine type of wheel. But here's the interesting part is where I'm going and getting the reference to my bindings. So you can see I'm doing a bindings.getById async. I'm passing it that binding ID, and then I'm checking on whether or not I was successful in getting my binding. So when this app first opens, we're actually running this code. Well, I don't have a binding yet probably, unless I've saved this document off. And so what you can see is at the bottom it's saying if we weren't successful, go take them to the data binding screen. So I actually have 2 pages there. You don't realize it, but when they load up, we show the home page, but we immediately check for a binding. If it's not there, take them to go set a binding. So that's exactly what we've done in this case here. And then if we do find a binding, we want to add a handler on binding data changed. So again, what that's going to do is anytime the data changes in anything in that table, we want to immediately be able to get notified of that so that we can repaint our wheel. That's what's allowing us to add new items to it. So again, it seems like there's a lot of script here. Most of this is to catch some scenarios where we don't have bindings and things like that. But the cool thing is the Hello World example has all that for you. Now, I want to show you one more thing here really quickly, and that is the example of being able to pull this up without, in fact, in this case, the app's not even running. I stopped my web server, so this shouldn't actually work. So let's go and find this on my desktop. And I have a messy desktop. I called it sample. There it is. So here's what I get. It says that there's an app error because it's not running, but check it out. It actually, in this case, took an image of it. That's what was in that HTML, it again took a snapshot of exactly what that looked like so that people can see. In fact, if I go and pass this off to someone that doesn't even have a modern version of Office, maybe they have an old version of Office, they at least can still get that picture. So, we provide some nice backward compatibility that way.
Yep.
Cool.
All right. Mail apps, onto mail apps. So with mail apps, they do require Exchange 2013. Exchange 2013 will host the user's mailbox. It will also host a manifest file. So that is that little simple file that tells Exchange where do I go to actually do something with this particular app. The other thing that manifest file contains for a mail app is information about how I activate your particular app. The concept of activation is really about running rules and having your app react and give Exchange a list of here's when I want to show up. It's not here's when I want to have access to the user's item. It's always related back to the item that the user is on, particularly on right now. So if you're going through your mailbox and you're going through item by item, as you click on an item, Exchange will run these rules. The activation will fire. Your link will show up if it matches one of those rules. Once it matches one of those rules, the user doesn't interact with your app until they actually click on your app. Once they click on your app, then your app runs. So you don't really have access to that user's item until someone actually clicks the button and does something with that. The other thing that you have access to is all the Exchange Web Service rules. We're not going to cover any of the Exchange Web Service calls in this talk, but just so you know, there is a possibility to actually do more with what you have, just accessing a user's item and accessing a user's appointment. The activation rules will fire. You specify them, and I'll show you what that looks like, how you actually make that available. And the last point there, again, is important, just to repeat it. It doesn't run the app. All the activation rules tell Exchange is, hey, here's when the app is supposed to be lit up, when users should be able to interact with it. Right? It's not, here's when you want access to it. To access the items, there's some different known types within the Office apps. The first one there is mailbox.item. So in this case, we're talking to an item, so we can talk to the subject. We can grab the body. We can grab the body as text in that particular API. For accessing a user profile, we can grab the user's display name. We could grab the user's email address, things like that. We also have the possibility to do regex matches. So if I'm looking at, for example, the example I'm going to show you is a VIN number. When I'm looking at a VIN number, I'm actually going to plug in a regex, have that regex match, light up, and be able to do something with that particular VIN number. We'll show you an example of that.
I think that's probably the killer one, Israel, because
Probably.
I mean, there's not an organization out there that doesn't have some sort of like number pattern for something. Maybe it's purchase orders, or maybe it's some sort of like tracking number. I mean, those are things that are very easy to go and write an internal mail app that you can target to your organization and be able to do some really cool examples. Me and Nathan are going to show you one on Thursday of where you can go and maybe like a help desk ticket and be able to go and pull up the status and update the status of a help desk ticket.
Yeah, for the folks that want to build apps, a quick shout out to my friend Kirk Evans. Kirk Evans actually explains to me, if you want to look at the opportunity for a mail app, anytime you're cutting and pasting from an inbox for a mail item to go do something, that's the opportunity for an app. If you're cutting and pasting content and going to do something, that's a definite opportunity for an app. So for you app builders out there, if you find yourself doing that or you find your customers doing that, go build an app. Go sell it in a marketplace for something like that and go make some money. You also have access to something called extracted entities. Extracted entities are things that your Exchange and Outlook know about. Things like meeting suggestions. Richard showed this in the example where it read some text and it says, hey, it looks like you might want a meeting for this. What it does is it actually reads the sentence and figures out, hey, this sentence sounds like a meeting. Sounds like an action item. So if you have that, it'll pop open the action item, and with the action item, you can actually do something with that information. Show you a quick demo. Let's hopefully get connected here. See if we can run this live. It's your machine. There's my wife again.
She's famous.
She's famous. They're having way more fun next door. I think we should just start having fun. Woo, 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 woo. All right, here we go. Here's my mail app. First thing I wanted to show you is what is it that I want to be doing with my mail app. In this case here, it's a VIN finder. So the example here, the demo that we're going to show is someone sends me an email, happens to have a VIN. I'm going to do a regex expression to catch that VIN number, and maybe I want to look it up on an external service. In this case, I'm going to be connecting to an external VIN verification service to actually get the data back. Here I want permission to read the item. We'll look at what some of those other permissions are. So in this case, restricted means you have no access to the item. So imagine this is kind of just something that shows up all the time. Maybe you're doing some ads, or maybe you're doing some additional information that you want to provide the user. I can read-write mailbox. Read-write mailbox isn't read-write everything. What it is restricted permission to actually get access to the user's mailbox. To maybe you want to create an item. Maybe you want to create a meeting suggestion or something like that, or a meeting. All right, we'll go back here. Control F4. Activation rules. This is the one that's really, really cool. There's some matching that happens. And I talked about it earlier where users navigating through their inbox, and we'll see this in action in a second. I can match different things. And with these different matches, different actions can happen. Here I'm saying if an item matches a regular expression, in my case here, I want it to look at the body as plain text. The name of my regular expression filter is VIN filter text, and there's my regular expression. I also want to ignore case, just in case somebody sends me something that is a mixed case. Here I'm looking at the body as HTML, and I'm also looking at the subject. So here I'm saying, well, hey, Outlook and Exchange, whenever you see an email, I want you to go look at the email, and if it matches any of this criteria, I want you to light up my app. Right? I don't want access to the item. I just want you to light up my app.
And so just help me understand this a little bit better, Israel. So what you're saying is these rules, they activate when I'm on an item in my inbox. It basically, when I select a new item, it goes and runs a bunch of rules and then figures out, do I show you?
Absolutely.
Okay.
All right, so we'll log on to my tenant here, to my inbox. The developer tenant that every one of you I just gave away a little bit earlier for the folks that just got here. Everyone gets a developer tenant while we're having a fire sale. Everyone gets a tenant.
And activating an app, again, that's not actually pulling up your HTML at all, right? All that's doing is making the app available.
That is correct. It's just popping it up. This is awesome. I have both video problems and network problems there. Oh, here we go. Here we go. Like it's going. Wi-Fi deploy succeeded. There's my app. All right, cool. It's going out to my tenant, logging me onto my mailbox. There's my app. Give me a sec. So we look at this number. It may look like a VIN, may not. Go through here. It's going to look at that. Doesn't see that. We'll look through there. Oh, hey, look. It found that pattern, and it launched my app. Right? It popped it open. So in this case here, pattern didn't match. My app didn't show up. This case here, pattern matches. App shows up. Go ahead and click on the app, and we'll spin through this. Hey, Israel, you're really debugging live JavaScript. Yes, I am debugging live JavaScript. How are you doing that? With Office and Visual Studio. Ooh. With the power of Office and Visual Studio. No one's excited about debugging JavaScript. All right, so here, what we did is we just went out, got some data. Here we're getting some data. This is just regular HTML, regular JSON, getting some data back. We'll continue through there. Go ahead and bind data. What I'm going to be doing is getting some information back out. Looks like I didn't get data back. This is not good. This is awesome. All right, so what would have happened is here, if I had gotten some data back, I would have gone through and just bind it to the user interface and then shown the user the information that I got back from the service. If any of you can't visualize it, once I get connected, I can definitely show you afterwards, but this is basically what would happen and how this would work. Let's continue through here. And that is a mail app. Any questions on the mail app? So here I would bind the information. Any questions on mail app? Mail apps make sense? All right.
Now they have a train. I'm sorry, could you repeat your question?
Does this app allow people to log in to some allow them to disconnect the mask before the access button?
So you're going to have to obviously be authenticated to be in Outlook, whether that's OA or your client. What's displayed in that HTML, think of it as an iframe, is whatever you want as a web developer. Do anything you want, right? So, if you have a site that needs to do like an OAuth authorization to, maybe I have a Yammer app that pulls in some Yammer activity for the user, right? Because I can look at the sender of something. I might have, that the first time I come into that app, have something that says I need to log in and remember me. So yeah, you could certainly, whatever you want in that HTML.
Correct. So the redirect. So the question is, what happens if I have to prompt the user for some credentials, right? Let's say I'm accessing an external service, and my app needs some credentials from the user. You could build a page that just has the login screen, and Richard actually showed you a pattern of that. You have a login page and a already logged in page, and then what you're doing is just navigating within the app, and you're navigating back and forth. So if the user's logged in, you don't show them the login screen. If they're not logged in, then you go back, show them the login screen, they enter user credentials, hit save, and then your app interacts with that. But in that case, as Richard mentioned, you're in an iframe. You are in, if you think of it as a mini browser, you're in a mini browser session there.
I'll jump over to mine.
Yep.
So I wanted to, go ahead. So, you can do cookies and things like that, but it's really, it's you as the web developer need to think about that. So that's, I would say a cookie is probably the best way to keep something persistent for those.
Yeah, there's an opportunity to save it to what's called local, there's the local profile. Yeah, there's the local profile of the user. You can save some information there, but not a lot. Look at the APIs for that. There's definitely going to help you out there.
So what I thought we'd do is I have a big SharePoint development background, and I think these apps get really exciting when you combine them with SharePoint. So imagine if I come up with like a really good task pane app, and I want that to be maybe the default experience in a document library, where the scenario I was thinking of is maybe I need to create an expense report or a purchase order or something like that, and when I go to the document library and I open it from as a content type, that it automatically has my app loaded into it, that we deliver it in that way. And we actually make it incredibly easy. When you see how easy it is for me to walk through this, you're going to be amazed at the power of this and how easy we've made it. So what I'm going to do is, I'm going to walk you through this. I'll just let you know that for the sake of time, I'm probably going to go through this relatively fast, but I do have this completely documented on my blog. So if you guys want to go and see kind of the slower version, we can do that too. So I'm going to go ahead and create a project. Both Israel and Nathan Miller, who's sitting here in the front, they're doing a 0 to 60 session on SharePoint apps this afternoon. So I'm not going to spend a lot of time talking about the details of building a SharePoint app, but I'm going to start with a SharePoint app here. That's kind of the key thing that I want to mention. We'll call this expense reporting. Now, when I say I'm not going to talk about the details of SharePoint apps, it's asking me, how do I want to host my app? And I have these 3 different options, and they're going to really help you guys understand those. What I'm going to do is I'm going to create what's called a SharePoint hosted app. Basically, that means I'm going to use SharePoint as my web server for everything. So it's going to go and create my project. It's going to ask me to authenticate, and I will do that real quick here. And I happen to have one of the longest tenant names in the world. And so you can see my project. In this case, all SharePoint apps have to have a start page. Interestingly, it's going to create one for me by default, but I don't even need this. I could actually go delete that page altogether. What I want to do is I want to make it to where someone can go to a document library, say new expense report, it loads Word, and it has my expense report app all built into it. So that's what I'm going to do. So I'm going to go up here to my SharePoint project, and I'm going to add a new item. There's a lot of options that I have for adding new items. There's things like you'd expect, like lists and modules and things like that. But the one that I think is really interesting is here at the bottom. I can add an app for Office in my app for SharePoint. That's really cool, and we're going to see what that does. So let me go ahead and do that, and I will call this the expense report. When I do this, it's going to ask me what type of app do you want, right? We've spent the last 60 minutes walking through the different types of apps. That's exactly what you're seeing here. It's saying, do you want to do a task pane app, content app? Mail app's blocked out here because there's no really kind of synergy between SharePoint and the mail apps. But what I want to do is I'm going to target Excel. I could change this later. I can show you that. It's really easy to change it later. But I want to do a Word app. I could target all of them if I wanted, but in this case, I'm going to go with Word. It's very important that if you do this, if you try to do this, that you don't click Finish. There is another option here that might be very interesting to you. So if I click Next, it's going to allow me to upload an existing document. So if I already have a really nice expense sheet that's already formatted, has tables and whatever I need into it, I could leverage that from the very get-go here. In this case, I'm just going to do the quick version, which is create one, just use a blank document. So when I do this, it's going to do a couple things. If you're a SharePoint person, it's actually putting that Office document in as a module. So it's going to deploy it to SharePoint as a module. And that's what you're going to see here. The other thing that it's doing is it's added an app manifest for that Office app. So if I were to just collapse some things here, here you can see the expense report manifest in Solution Explorer. And ultimately, that is my manifest here. You can see it showing me the start page for my Office app, the permissions, all kinds of things like that. So we've now added that expense sheet. But now we need to add it to where when someone goes and creates a new item in a library, that expense sheet is automatically created. So far I've only done one thing. I've just added one thing to my site, but I'm going to add one more now. So let's go out here, add new item. This time we're going to do a list. And we'll call this expense reports. I'll go ahead and say add. I want this to be a document library. And here, again, don't be quick and say finish, because there's a really interesting option if I just click next. Here I can specify the document template for this library. So that's exactly what I want to do. I want to go point to that Office document that's already been put in my project as a module. So basically what you see here in Windows Explorer, that's just my project structure. This is that expense report document that was provisioned when I added the Office app. If you had gone and browsed to an existing Word document, that's what I would be looking at here, is that Office document. So I'm now associating this Word document with that document library. Go ahead and say finish. We're almost done. There's just one little step left to do. And some of this is just kind of to make things look a little bit better. So you can see I could add additional columns to my document library. I'm going to close this out. What I do want to do, just to make this a little bit prettier, is that in my expense reports library, I want to make my content type a little bit prettier. It actually creates a content type behind the scenes. So I want, when someone goes to that menu, for it to have a pretty name, so expense report. And we'll change the description to create an expense report. All right. Last thing, there's also a list instance in here. If you know what a list instance is, it's saying you've defined a document library, but let's actually create an instance of it in your site. So it's actually what's provisioning that list within your site. Here's the URL to that. Guess what I'm going to do? Just like an Office app has a start page, a SharePoint app has a start page. And I want my SharePoint app to start in this document library. So let's go ahead and grab this URL. I'm going to go to now this is an app manifest for SharePoint, but you can see just like Office, it has a start page. Nathan and Israel will help you walk through this later. Go ahead and put the start page in, and we're done. And let's take a look at how this runs. So I'm going to go ahead and click Start. In this case, it's going to go ahead and deploy out to our SharePoint site. If we look at our output window, it's going and deploying this out into SharePoint. And it's putting all the information, all the declarative things that we've created in our SharePoint app. I'm doing this against Office 365. I think that's one thing that's key. When Israel was talking about a developer tenant, that's what a developer tenant is. You get your own Office 365 instance. So this is going out to SharePoint Online. I think that's another really important aspect is all this custom development. That's something we never really allowed you to do in our cloud in the past, and now it's something that we absolutely support because of the isolation model and how we do this. So here it goes. It's going into the site, and it's in our expense reports library. Here's the cool thing. If I go over here to Files, New Document, look what we have. We have our expense report as a content type. And if everything worked well, when I open this in Word, we're going to get the kind of default Hello World Office app. We should. See, here it goes. Opening. There's our app. And this is just doing some simple I/O. So if I said TechEd rocks and say get data, you can see that it was able to read out of that document. So hopefully that shows you we've basically packaged our app with a document library now. And this is something that people can just go use our document library in our SharePoint site, and they automatically get our app. They don't have to do anything else. It's already there. So hopefully this starts to show you some really cool things you can do with these apps together.
That was pretty awesome. All right. Thank you. From a deployment standpoint, a couple things we wanted to touch on from a deployment, right? How do I get my apps actually out there? One quick way to get them out there would be the store. You can put them out in the store and have people download them. If you don't want to get them in the store, if you want to put them on to your on-premise environment, on-premise 2013, or your cloud 2013 environment, the way that these gets packaged it up is a manifest file. You take that .xml file, upload that to Exchange, and you get it. If you're on your developer tenant and you want to play with this, go to your settings, on your user settings, go to your apps. You could actually upload your XML file right to your apps on your user settings and get access to your app as well. That way. Now, your app still has to be running. There still has to be a web server running. So to package up your web server, one quick way to do that would be using Azure. Go ahead and use Azure to host your actual application logic. Maybe it's calling out to a service or doing some database calls and saving some information. But that's another way to do it. So there's a few ways to deploy your app and your app manifest. Some other ways to actually deploy what's called the catalog of information, which is where other users actually go to get those apps. We talked about the Office Store. I mentioned quickly the Exchange app catalog. There's two other places. You can put them on a file share, right? Just a manifest file. Hey, user, download this from this location and add it to your mailbox. Another one is the SharePoint app catalog. So again, we're going to talk about the SharePoint app catalog later on this afternoon. It's basically a location to go get SharePoint apps and Office apps, just like the cool app that Richard just built on very quickly distributing that to your SharePoint environment. This is what we wanted to do, and we think we did that. We think we showed you the power. We think we showed you the possibility. There's definitely more that you can do, but the rest is pretty much up to you, right? We can build. They provide you the APIs. They provide you access, provide you a developer tenant, provide you a quick way to actually build apps. Even if you don't have Visual Studio 2010, you can use Napa to build your apps. That's another quick way to do it, low barrier to entry, and you could do it on your Mac. So you don't have to give up your PC. You could actually build apps on a Mac. There's some related content. We did leave some time for questions. Come join us this afternoon for developing apps for SharePoint 2013. There's some additional information there, additional topics there, building task pane apps for Office 2013, and content apps, where if you want to go deeper on the different things that we touched on. Some additional resources. I'm sure you've seen some of these slides before. MSDN, the additional one there is dev.office.com. Make sure you fill out your evals. We will have time for questions. Thank you very much. Questions? 0 questions. So the question is, will there be content apps for Word anytime soon?
I haven't heard specifically if that's on the roadmap. I know that we're continuing to do a lot of investment into this model. There's certain things. We actually had a slide at first on what's missing, right? Because if you've done Office apps in the past, there were certain things that you could do that obviously aren't here. One of the first ones that comes to mind is like a ribbon button. I could do ribbon buttons pretty easily. In fact, in the SharePoint apps, you can do a ribbon button. So those are the types of things that I could see fitting into the app model moving forward, like a content app for Word or maybe PowerPoint, but at this point, it's, we haven't really gone further on our disclosure on some of those items.
Yes, sir. Okay. So I have some VSTO add-ins that go against a SQL compact database. What happens to provide? Yeah. So what happens to those type of apps? I think you're going to have to look at those on an app-by-app basis. You just mentioned offline connectivity. So that's something that we'll definitely have to look at. So I think you'll have to talk to us offline.
I will say,
Yep.
let me be really clear that we're not saying that the old office development model is dead by any means, right? So there's absolutely still cases for scenarios like that. And to be quite honest, just hearing, I doubt that model would fit into that well, where I need disconnected data and runs. First of all, unless you built some app that looked at localhost and you put like IIS Express on a user's computer, if they have no network connectivity, they can't run HTML content. Yeah. And so your app flat out will not run, and there's no concept of necessarily having a local data store for lots of data like that.
That's a good point. So it's not, the Visto is not going away. There might still be scenarios where you do need to do that. Question? Yep. So the question is, the mail app that we showed is passive. Can you make it more active, like being able to respond? Right, I want to look at that. So no, right now, no. If you think of the security concerns, right, I don't want you just going wild on my inbox. So it's always, an activation rule will fire. If your activation rule meets that criteria, then you'll get real estate on the banner. When a user clicks that banner, then you'll actually be able to run. Right? Being able to just go into someone's mailbox, you might be able to use the Exchange Web Services to do that, if you want to do that in the back. Or you'd probably have to look at another scenario for that, another type of technology. Any other questions? Question in the back? Yep, so the question is there any opportunity to interact with the document panel or the ribbon or other things that are on the surface, that are on the document surface in the app, right? In the Word or PowerPoint? Want to take that?
Yeah, that's a good question. I have to maybe follow up with you on that specifically if that's available. I know there's ability to read some of the deeper properties of the document. What I will say is that adding SharePoint to the mix is a whole different dimension now that SharePoint, everything's available via REST and JSON services. Theoretically, I can take, one of the interesting things is when I open that document from that library, behind the scenes, the app knows the location that it's running from. So it knows the exact library that it's coming from, and I can go and look at that library. Actually, I know the exact file, and I can go get metadata from it in that way. So for a case where it's in SharePoint, absolutely, I can get all the augmented metadata. For it being standalone, I can investigate that. I'm not sure that it's all in there. I will say that, again, to the point of, well, we have a content app for Word, I know we're constantly looking at adding new, enhancing these APIs so that more is available. In fact, I've been working with this for almost 2 years now, and at first we didn't have PowerPoint as a task pane app. PowerPoint wasn't around. In fact, some of our most recent documentation still omits that you can do task pane apps for PowerPoint. It was something that, again, we felt like we could get it out and get it solid, and so it's there. And I think you'll see other things like that pop up as well.
Any other questions? All right, we'll be around for a little bit. Thank you so much. Enjoy your day.
Thanks.